everyone. Welcome back to Learning.
Picture this. You are sitting in a really high-stakes meeting.
Oh, I know where this is going.
Right. The fluorescent lights are humming. There are like 3 senior managers at the table.
The tension is already there.
Exactly. And someone just pitched a genuinely terrible idea. I mean, an idea that will absolutely tank the quarter.
A complete disaster.
So you look them right in the eye, you clear your throat, and you bluntly say, I disagree with you. You are wrong.
Oh, no. And then you just get that absolute dead silence in the room.
The worst kind of silence. The kind where you can actually hear the air conditioning rattling in the ceiling.
Yeah, that is definitely not a fun place to be.
And the crazy thing is, you haven't used a single piece of incorrect grammar. Subject, verb, object, it was all totally perfect.
Right.
But you have just committed a massive professional faux pas. You might have just permanently damaged a working relationship.
Because you basically treated a really complex social interaction like a true-false test.
Yeah.
And this is a harsh reality for so many professionals, especially those working in a second language or even just operating in global corporate cultures.
Which is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to our deep dive on advanced corporate communication.
We spend years and years memorizing vocabulary, but we spend almost zero time learning the cultural diplomacy of how to actually deploy it.
Exactly. Our sources today pull from an instructional guide on corporate English. Specifically, breaking down these real-world case studies of linguistic faux pas.
It's fascinating stuff.
It really is. We are exploring the massive and honestly often dangerous gap between what you say and how you say it.
Because navigating a disagreement is tricky.
It's like, okay, it's less like taking a grammar test and more like driving a manual transmission car for the first time.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right. You know exactly where you want to go. That is your vocabulary. You have the horsepower.
Right, you've got the words.
But if you don't know how to feather the clutch, which is your diplomacy and your tone, you're just going to violently stall out right in the middle of the intersection.
That is perfect, because if you just dump the clutch, right, by using blunt, unfiltered words, the conversation just stalls.
The engine dies.
Exactly. The source material points out that, 90% of English learners know the words, I disagree.
Sure, it's basic vocabulary.
But using them raw, without the right framing, can literally cost you a promotion, or a client, or even a job.
It's wild to think about.
So before we get into the exact phrasing you need to keep the car moving smoothly, we have to look at what the text calls the bluntness trap. This is our vocabulary power block.
The bluntness trap. Hey, so the text highlights 2 default responses that people use right out of the gate.
Let me guess, they are not subtle.
Not at all. The first is simply saying, you are wrong.
Ouch.
And the second is saying, I don't agree with you. Now, I look at those and I think, well, they are honest.
They're very honest.
They get straight to the point. But the guide treats these as absolute conversational landmines.
And they are landmines because they function as direct accusations.
How so?
Well, think about it. When you say you are wrong, or even just I don't agree with you, the focus immediately shifts away from the idea and lands right onto the person.
Oh, I see.
It becomes a personal indictment. You are essentially attacking their judgment.
Right. It feels like an attack on them, not the spreadsheet.
Exactly. And if we look at the psychological mechanism here, the moment someone feels their competence is being attacked, their brain's threat response activates.
Just biologically, they freeze up.
Their defenses go up. The conversation shuts down instantly. It really doesn't matter if your English grammar is flawless or if your data is totally bulletproof.
None of that matters anymore.
Nope. Your communication has failed because the other person is no longer processing logical arguments. They are just preparing to defend themselves.
So if the blunt instrument just triggers a threat response, what is the alternative?
We need a foundational shift.
Right. So the source gives us a shift here. Instead of, you're wrong, the upgrade is, and I love this, that's a fair point, but.
Yes.
Or another one they give, I see where you're coming from, however.
Those phrases are incredibly powerful.
They seem so simple, though.
They do, but they employ the psychology of validation. They work because they validate the other person's perspective before you actually deliver the disagreement.
You're softening the blow.
More than that, when you say, I see where you're coming from, you are separating the person's ego from the problem at hand.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You're signaling to them, hey, I respect you, I am listening to you, I believe you are a rational person.
And once you do that.
Once their ego is safe and that threat response is deactivated, then you drop the however.
Okay, but I have to push back on this a little bit.
Go for it.
A really pragmatic question here. If someone is objectively wrong, like the math in the spreadsheet is entirely broken, or their strategy will literally legally ruin the company.
Right, a high-stakes error.
Yeah. Why do we have to sugarcoat it? Doesn't validating a bad idea just waste time in a fast-paced business environment?
I hear this all the time.
We're on a deadline, We aren't here to hold hands, we're here to hit targets.
That is a very common objection, particularly from people who really value high efficiency. But it's fundamentally misunderstanding the tactic.
Pause. Wait, really? How so?
It is not about sugarcoating at all. It is strictly about keeping the listener receptive. You aren't validating the bad idea.
I'm not.
No, you are validating their right to have a perspective.
Wait, explain that distinction. Validating the perspective, not the idea.
Exactly. If someone proposes a terrible marketing campaign, you aren't saying the campaign is good.
Right.
You are saying, I see why you want to target that demographic. You are acknowledging their underlying logic.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because a blunt no makes people defensive, and defensive people double down on bad ideas out of pride.
Oh man, I've seen that happen so many times, it just turns into a massive power struggle.
Exactly. Whereas a phrase like, I see your point, though I feel differently about the execution, that keeps the conversational door wide open for actual problem solving.
So it actually saves time.
You get to the solution much faster because you don't have to spend 20 minutes soothing a bruised ego or just arguing in circles.
Let me think about that. So if a lead developer says we need to scrap the entire code base and start over.
A classic tech nightmare.
Right. And if I just say, no, that's wrong, we don't have time, we are going to spend the next hour arguing about who is right.
Guaranteed.
But if I use this tactic, I'd say something like, I see where you're coming from. The current code is incredibly messy. However, a total rewrite might push us past our launch deadline.
Precisely. You aligned with their frustration about the messy code. You made them feel heard.
And because of that, they're infinitely more likely to listen to my concern about the deadline.
Exactly. Validation protects the ego.
But protecting the ego isn't always enough, right? Like when you're in a situation where the other person has fundamentally misunderstood something crucial, and you have to actively correct them without overstepping.
Yes, and that takes us right into our immersive role-play segment. We need to look at highly specific, high-pressure professional scenarios.
The guide introduces a tactic called partial agreement.
Right. Because sometimes you don't disagree with the whole premise, just a piece of it.
So what's the phrase for that?
The key phrase the guide highlights is, you make a good point. I'd just add that.
Oh, I like that. The job interview example the text provides perfectly illustrates this.
Walk us through it.
Let's say you are in an interview and the hiring manager confidently states, teamwork is the absolute most important skill for this role.
Standard interview question.
But you've read the job description carefully and you know this role is going to be 90% remote and highly independent.
Okay, a trap.
Yeah. If you just agree to please them, you look like you don't actually understand the job. But if you say, actually, no, independent work is more important, you just told your potential boss they are wrong.
Which is an immediate red flag for an interviewer.
Right, you're toast.
They're often testing not just your knowledge, but your diplomacy. How do you handle pushback from authority?
So, using the partial agreement tactic, you say, you make a good point. I just add that independent problem solving is equally valuable in remote work situations.
Notice the mechanics of what happens there. You validate their premise. Teamwork is a good point. You aren't dismissing it,
Right.
but you confidently introduce your own perspective as an addition rather than a correction.
It changes everything. You sound agreeable and collaborative, but also highly intelligent and self-assured.
Exactly. You aren't just a yes man, but you completely avoid being combative.
It fundamentally changes the dynamic. You're placing your idea next to theirs rather than using your idea to smash theirs.
I love that visual.
And speaking of changing the dynamic, we need to dive into the immersive role-play scenario from the text because it features the ultimate de-escalation phrase.
Oh, this is for those moments of absolute panic in a corporate environment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine a project manager comes to your desk and says they need to cut the budget for a major, highly anticipated client event by 40%.
40%? Wow.
Yeah, they want to downgrade from a full weekend conference to just a simple 2-hour dinner.
Okay, that's drastic.
As the team member whose bonus depends on this client, my immediate visceral instinct is to yell, "You can't do that, the client will leave us."
Which is completely understandable. The stakes are very high.
But if I react that way?
If you react that way, you are directly challenging the project manager's authority and their financial judgment. You are creating a wall.
Right.
Instead, using the tactics we've discussed, you start with that crucial validation. You say, that's a fair point. I know budgets are incredibly tight across the board right now.
Pause. Okay, so I've aligned myself with their underlying problem. I recognize the pressure they are under.
Exactly. Then you bring in the warning gently. You say, however, I think a 40% cut might actually cost us more in the long run. If the client feels the event was low effort, we could lose the contract renewal entirely.
And here's the magic phrase, the conversational judo.
Yes.
Instead of demanding they leave the budget alone, you say, I'm not sure I have the full picture yet. Could you walk me through the budget breakdown? I'd like to find a middle ground.
Could you walk me through it? It is a masterclass in professional diplomacy.
It really is conversational judo. You know how in judo you don't block a heavy punch with your face?
Right, that would hurt.
You step off the line of attack and use the other person's momentum against them.
Exactly.
When you say, could you explain more? Or could you walk me through the breakdown? You aren't attacking their idea head on. You are forcing them to defend, explain, and unpack their own premise.
You're using their momentum.
And practically, what does that achieve in the room?
It diffuses the tension instantly. It buys you time to formulate your actual counter-argument.
Which you desperately need.
And most importantly, by making them walk through the math themselves, they might actually spot the catastrophic flaw in their own plan.
Oh, that's brilliant.
You've essentially told them their idea is terrible, but you've done it by inviting them to collaborate. You aren't fighting them, you are reviewing the math together.
It preserves the hierarchy, too. The project manager still feels in control of the explanation, but you've successfully paused a disastrous decision.
Exactly. Now, it's fascinating that our focus so far has been entirely on the conflict itself.
Right. We spend so much energy worrying about how to disagree.
But the text argues that the real trap is set long before the disagreement begins.
Oh, right. This brings us to the mistake autopsy.
Yes. It happens the moment we agree.
This is the section of the text that really shifted my perspective. It reveals that how you agree dictates exactly how well your disagreements will be received later on.
Let's look at the baseline. The default beginner way to disagree on facts is to say, no, that's not right.
Which, as we've established, is abrupt and dismissive.
The native speaker upgrade the source provides is, I'm not entirely convinced. Can we look at the data again?
That's much softer.
It invites that collaboration. But the real revelation comes when we look at how we confirm things.
Right. Mistake number 4 in the guide. The mistake is simply saying, yes, I agree.
It sounds perfectly fine on paper.
Grammatically flawless.
But in spoken professional English, just saying, yes, I agree in a flat tone sounds robotic.
It really does.
It sounds like you were reading from a textbook, or worse, that you are totally disengaged from the conversation.
The guide points out that native speakers, particularly in Anglo-American corporate cultures, use layered, highly enthusiastic agreements.
They really do.
They don't just say, I agree. They say, absolutely, or totally, or that makes complete sense.
We have to explore the cultural mechanics of why this is so necessary.
Yeah, why is everyone so excited?
In many English-speaking business environments, enthusiasm is equated with alignment and trust. Having varying levels of enthusiastic agreement establishes a baseline of natural human rapport.
Like an emotional bank account.
Exactly like an emotional bank account. If your baseline agreement sounds robotic, if you just nod and say, yes, I agree, you are only depositing pennies into that account.
Pauses. I see where this is going. If I've only deposited pennies of goodwill.
Exactly. When you finally have to make a withdrawal, when you have to disagree with a colleague, you don't have enough goodwill in the account.
So you go into the red.
Your disagreement is going to sound incredibly cold and harsh, no matter how carefully you phrase it, because you haven't established yourself as a warm, collaborative human being beforehand.
Okay, I hear the logic, but honestly,
Yeah.
it sounds exhausting, having to constantly manage everyone else's feelings, making sure I'm depositing enough enthusiastic dollars into the emotional bank account just so I can state a fact later on.
It can feel that way.
Absolutely. Totally. That's a fair point, but why can't we just focus on the raw data?
Because human beings aren't spreadsheets.
That is unfortunately very true.
The reality of business is that the data only matters if the person sitting across the table is willing to listen to it.
Good point.
If you have the data that can save the company $1 million, but you present it in a way that insults the senior vice president's intelligence.
Your data is useless.
Totally useless. They will find a reason to reject it. Managing the emotional undercurrent of a conversation isn't a distraction from the work. In many ways, it is the work.
It's the grease that keeps the corporate gears moving.
Exactly.
Let's put this entirely to the test. Let's do a rapid-fire challenge.
Oh, okay. I'm ready. Let's do it.
I am going to throw some terrible, high-stress workplace scenarios at you, and I want to see how you navigate them using the phrases we've just unpacked.
Bring it on.
Scenario 1. Your boss pulls you aside on a Friday afternoon and says, morale is low. I'm making it mandatory for the entire team to come in this Saturday for an 8-hour team-building retreat.
Oh, that is brutal.
You know for a fact that forcing people to give up their weekend will cause a mutiny. How do you stop this?
Okay. Bypassing the ego, deploying validation, I would say. I completely agree that we need to boost morale, and it's a great idea to get everyone together. However, I'm worried that making it mandatory on a weekend might actually cause more burnout. Could we look at blocking off a Friday afternoon instead?
Perfect. You validated the intention-boosting morale, but completely dismantled the execution.
It works?
Okay, scenario 2. Marketing comes to you and says, we are launching the new software product 2 months early to beat our competitor. We'll just skip the final QA testing.
Wow. That is a disaster waiting to happen.
Absolute disaster.
Yeah. I'd use the conversational judo here. I'd say, I see where you're coming from. Beating the competitor to market is a huge priority. I'm just not sure I have the full picture on the risk assessment. Could you walk me through how we plan to handle the inevitable customer support tickets if the software launches with bugs? I'd like to find a middle ground where we launch fast but don't damage our reputation.
Look at that. You didn't say, no, the software will break.
Right.
You made them explain how they're going to fix the broken software, which forces them to realize they can't skip QA. It is so smooth.
It takes practice, but once you internalize the framework, validate the premise, introduce the concern as an addition, and ask them to explain further, you can handle almost any conflict.
If you take all these tactics into your next board meeting, it completely shifts your perspective on what it means to be fluent.
The core takeaway across all these sources in our deep dive today is that disagreeing in English is fundamentally not about winning an argument.
No, it's really not.
It is about being heard without making the other person feel attacked. That specific nuance, the ability to navigate conflict while maintaining the working relationship, is the ultimate marker of true fluency.
It's not about how many big words you know.
Not at all. It's about how safely you can navigate complex social terrain.
I challenge you to apply this literally today, in your very next meeting, or even your next conversation with a friend.
Try it out.
Try biting your tongue the exact moment you want to blurt out, I disagree, or you're wrong. Just pause, take a breath, and instead start with, that's a fair point, but...
Just try it once.
Just try it once, and watch how the energy in the room shifts. Watch how the other person relaxes instead of gearing up for a fight.
It transforms an adversarial debate into a collaborative problem-solving session.
It really does. And, looking back at all this, it leaves me with this lingering, fascinating thought experiment.
Oh, I love thought experiments. Lay it on me.
We are talking about learning these highly diplomatic, polite ways of disagreeing, specifically as a skill in a second language or a corporate dialect, right?
Yeah.
But if you practice this enough, if you constantly train your brain to pause, to validate the other person's perspective first, to actively look for the part of their argument you can agree with before you state your own case, does it actually rewire how we think about conflict internally?
Wow. That is a profound question. It touches on the idea of whether the language we use shapes our actual cognitive processes.
Right. Like if we force ourselves to speak English more empathetically using these frameworks of validation and partial agreement, does it actually make us more empathetic people overall?
That's fascinating.
Do we start genuinely seeing the other side's perspective just because our vocabulary forces us to look for it?
It's highly possible. When you change the words you use, you eventually change the way you perceive the person sitting across from you.
They stop being an obstacle.
Exactly. Stop being an obstacle and start being a collaborator.
Something to mull over before your next tense meeting. Because remember, you can have all the right vocabulary in the world, a massive engine of knowledge.
But if you walk into that silent boardroom and dump the clutch with the wrong tone,
you're the one who has to deal with the stalled out conversation. Choose your words and your framing carefully. See you next time.